The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation presents Our Story, hosted by the Foundation's chairman and president, Jason Villalba. Each week on Our Story, hear the personal and intimate stories of Hispanics all across Texas, told in their own voices. Our Story provides insight into a community of people who are literally and figuratively changing the complexion of the United States. This is who we are.
Welcome back to the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation's Our Story. Each week, we bring you the stories of friends and people that I've come across and people that you've read about in the newspapers from all walks of life, always Latinos from Texas. Today, I have somebody special to me because he happens to be my city councilman and somebody that I've really gotten to watch and get to know. And it's just one of these citizen servants who's got a servant's heart and who exemplifies what it means to be somebody who cares about their community. And I had a chance to know him on the trail when I was a candidate myself and then through other activities. And he's just a special guy. And so I'd like to introduce you to my friend Omar Narvaez. He's the city councilman in District 6 for the city of Dallas. Omar, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. This is really exciting. I've been watching this organization from when it was born and as it's grown, and it's really exciting. I think these podcasts are so important to share our stories and make sure that people just get to hear, who certain people are. And I think that storytelling is so important. And, and it's also, this is, now in our virtual digital world, it's a way that we can capture stories, for eternity. And so thank you for having me here.
Well, it's my honor that you're here. I know how busy you are. You're in a campaign right now, and you were telling me about 15 different citizens issues you have to deal with regularly. Having been a former elected official, I know how that can be. So thank you. But one of the reasons I wanted to spend some time with you is just because watching you serve the community, it's clear to me that it's much more to you than just a job. And, every elected official says that, but you show it by your actions and how you deal with the issues. And so that usually is the result of a lifetime of service. And I just wanted to explore that with you. So I want to start from way back. Where are you from, Omar?
I was originally born in Houston, Texas, but I am a Dallasite at heart. My mom and all of my family have been here in Dallas for about 100 years. This is where our family started. So I make the joke of I was conceived in the city of Dallas. I just happened to be born in Houston, but mama raised me right because I was raised a Dallas Cowboy fan.
Dallas Cowboys. Well, you could also claim, though, the Houston Astros, they've been popular recently, and the Rangers haven't been great for a while. But if you're a Cowboy fan, you're a true Dallas fan.
That's right. I'm a Cowboy fan, and I am a Houston Astros fan because that's where my grandpa, when I was growing up, when I was a little boy, he died when I was very young, but that's what we used to go do together was go to Houston Astros games at the Astrodome. So I, got to watch the Stros play in the Astrodome. So I got a lot of flack when the Stros won the World Series because I was running around with my Stros hat on, and being a councilman, people were like, how can you wear that? You're supposed to be the Rangers. I love my Rangers. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But the Stros are in my heart because I grew up with them. So it just brought back so many good memories, with my grandpa and, being able to go to the Astrodome, and he didn't care. I could always get a chili cheese long foot dog popcorn candy, and he always bought me a little souvenir, whether it was a little baseball bat or, a little helmet or something. It was really awesome, to get to spend that time with my grandpa at those games.
Did Grandpa live in the house, or was he just around you frequently when you were growing up?
So I didn't live in the house, but was around very frequently. He and my grandma divorced when I was very young. We all moved to Houston together. I wasn't born yet. And then he stayed for several years, and then he moved back to his home, which was Dallas, because he was born and raised in Little Mexico.
So Grandpa's down in Houston, comes back to Dallas in Little Mexico.
Yeah.
And Mom is down in Houston with him, or she was born while he was down there?
Yeah. Oh, no. Mom was a teenage mom. So there was no choice. She was coming, her and my aunt and my grandma and grandpa, they were, if you want to call it, migrated to Houston. And this was in the 70s. So 1973 is when I was born. And then now it's whatever year it is. And my grandmother passed away. It'll be almost 4 years ago. And actually in my campaign, right before it was a special election, and she passed away right before then. But I got to see her one last time. And then it was like 3 days later, we got the call. And I was knocking doors in the neighborhood that she grew up in far West Dallas, Ledbetter. So the last thing I got to talk to her about was how I was running for council and to represent where she grew up. And, she got to hear that and she knew what was going on, but she was fading in and out. She went through renal failure. And then, so my aunt and my mom are still down in Houston. And then I have 3 cousins from my aunt, and then my younger brother and myself with my mom, and 3 are still down in Houston of cousins. So my mom, my aunt, and then 2 of my cousins and my brother are still there. And then I live in Dallas, and then I have my 3rd cousin. He lives in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. So
I know.
That happened. Houston and Dallas, and then
Pittsburgh.
So you're raised by mom. Grandpa's a big part of your life.
Yes.
Is dad around at this time or
no?
Okay. So single mom situation.
That's right.
And you grew up in the public schools in Houston.
That's right.
And then to Dallas later on in life.
Later on in life, yeah. I went to Spring Branch Independent School District schools, elementary through high school. So I attended 1 elementary school, 1 middle school. We called them junior highs back then. Northbrook High School is where I graduated from. And then in 1992, when I graduated, then I left to the University of Texas at Austin. And so I'm a Longhorn. And then I met my partner there in 1995. And we've been together ever since. So we just celebrated our 25th anniversary.
Yeah, congrats.
Thanks. In December. So we went to Disney World for in a pandemic.
So you leave Houston to go to UT for undergraduate.
That's right.
And how did you get down? How did you find UT?
So I was in the band in Northbrook where I went to high school, and the band kind of was the thing that I enjoyed doing, being part of the marching band. And I was like, what better band in the nation than, UT Austin? But I wanted to be a pharmacist at the time is what I thought I wanted to be. And so it was between the University of Texas at Austin or going to Northwestern up in Chicago. And so I got into both schools because both of them have pharmacy schools. So I thought, what better way to start? And I think really Northwestern was more to be to really scare my mom because she didn't want me to leave Houston. She wanted me to either go to Rice or the University of Houston, and I wanted to get away. And so it was like, well, the compromise would easily be UT Austin if the fear was he's going to go to Chicago.
2.5 hours away, just far enough away to be from mom to feel like you're having the college experience, but close enough to where if you needed to wash clothes, you could drive home and do it that way.
Or if I needed, just needed a hug or something, it's close enough to get home. And then finish school in education. And this is where I ended up, was where I probably always should have been. It's what I've always done and been part of. And a lot of people in my family are educators. And but I never taught in the proper classroom. A lot of fear at that time because this is the mid 90s, it's 1997. And so because of my sexual orientation, I was really scared that something could happen to me. Somebody could lie or say I tried to do something that wasn't true. That was a fear factor in my head that I didn't realize till much later. And so I ended up working for a major department store and did corporate training, worked my way from the ground. I used to sell shoes, lady shoes, and worked my way up, the ranks and ended up becoming like the equivalent of a district manager.
So what's it like to be LGBT at UT in the 90s, it would have been? Look, I'm your vintage. I remember as a kid, it still wasn't as popularized or as accepted as it is today.
Right.
And so even in college, there must have been some experiences where you're like, is it completely comfortable to be open and out at that time?
Yeah, being in Austin, people call it the liberal bastion of Texas, right? I didn't really think that I had discrimination against me as an LGBTQ person, but I'm not going to say it didn't happen. I think it was more that when you're kind of closeted, that was my starting to come out and be comfortable with who I was. And I got really lucky that I just happened to find a really solid group of friends. I actually was in a fraternity. I was the first to come out in my fraternity. And, that was scary. And
how are they with that?
Shockingly, they were very, very accepting because they're like, you're our brother, but my fraternity is a Catholic fraternity at that, Phi Kappa Theta. But what was really cool is the rest of my brothers were really, really accepting. But then I didn't realize that in my pledge class, I actually had some gay pledge fraternity brothers. And so I came out and then all of a sudden it was like, there was something in the water and like 6 or 7 guys came out, within that semester.
Well, you showed courage and leadership and people were comfortable with that.
Yeah. And it was, I'm not going to lie and say it wasn't scary because we were still, the AIDS crisis was still kind of there. There were medications coming out. People weren't dying, it wasn't the death sentence, but it was still not it's something people could be scared of HIV and things like that. But we all made sure we all got educated that, I can't remember if it was Ben or it was another group. We actually went to make sure that we got sexual history and like be taught, as gay men, what we should be doing. And so we don't screw up. And so I'll go with the, being one in the fraternity, two, going to UT Austin, somewhere in there probably saved my life. And just because it's like I got to be who I needed to be with the experiences that I needed to experience. But at the same time, I got the education of how to protect myself and not get into some kind of a health issue or health trouble. But at the same time, I didn't have that mental health problem of not being accepted that so many do. And then a few years later, I finally came out to my mom. It took me about 3 years later to come out to my mom. And the story is actually kind of funny because she called me and I was with my partner already for 3 years. And then the phone rings like some crazy hour in the morning. That's when moms know to call you, right? Because they're like,
get you off guard.
Right. Yo sé que vas a estar dormido, right? So let me wake you up. And I answer the phone and I don't know what was going through my brain, but for whatever reason, I see that call and in my head, it's like my mom knows. I don't know why. And I answer like, hey, mom. And she's like, I have a really important question I need to ask you. And I don't know if it was the tone or me being half asleep or what it was. And I go, wait. Before you ask me that question, I need to tell you something because I wanted to tell her. Yeah. And I was like, I just need to tell you, mom, I'm gay. And then she's like, mijo, I already know that. She goes, I have no idea what the question was. I don't remember it. But it was just so, it's like, I know that already. She goes, and I love Jesse. And, it's like, so what, it was a great conversation.
Well,
but
parents, I imagine, know.
I think so.
I mean, obviously you grew up at a time in the home where you weren't comfortable coming out and say elementary school, middle school, high school. Now it's much more prevalent to see that. I imagine, like most LGBTQ individuals, you knew early on. You never had an idea otherwise.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I tried to think how far back did I know. And I've gone back to as far as, sometime in elementary school when it was like, I'm going to say that I was like, it wasn't sexual desire or anything like that. It was like, I remember like being attracted to boys, but not in a like, oh, I want to go have sex with boys. It was in a like, I like boys, but it was like, oh, but I must just like to play with them. It's like, but it wasn't, I'm trying to think back, I'm 47 now, but go back to that. But I knew for sure by middle school, like I knew that those desires were in my head back then.
My wife was a retired educator. She taught school from K through 3 and then second grade and a number of different grades. And she said, it's clear these children, which direction they're going, they don't know anything else.
Right.
This argument that we've had for decades, I mean, I think it's coming to an end now.
I hope so.
I feel like our culture has begun to accept this without even blinking an eye. My children, I don't even know it's a thing, but we grew up at a time when there were still epithets thrown around. It was on television. Mm-hmm. You could take a look at some movies in the 1970s and see, even the 80s, there'd be some pejoratives and things thrown around.
Well, and being a Latino and gay at the same time, it's like, like you said, we were either the joke or we were the ones that you're supposed to, if you want to say bullied, and, it's like, and pick on, not accepted. And I, for whatever reason, that really caused a change in me. I've always been helping folks. I've always been volunteering, and because that's how I was raised. But it was probably in college when I started to realize, like, wow, there's what I think back then were like what I thought were civil rights that, I later learned were civil rights that we were not being afforded or how we were being discriminated against. And all the way even through my career, and up until the late it was probably 2007, the company that I had worked with at the time, we were downsizing because the economy sucked and, things were tanking. And there were 3 of us that were doing the job that I was doing at the time for the state of Texas and Louisiana. And, it was one of those where it's like, okay, when we knew it was going to happen. So I was like, I should be safe. I'm running the largest district. I'm the only one, who had increases, like our sales were up, it's like, we're in this bad time and I'm performing, like I'm making sure that we're getting stuff done. And then I was passed over for one of the other 2. And, so I was devastated because I just sat there and was like, my best quality and my worst quality are my loyalty. And so it's like, I have been so loyal, and, my entire life was wrapped up into what I was doing as a career. And that was a good lesson for me, because one, it was like, yes, give your loyalties, but remember, a corporation's just a corporation. And, sometimes you got to move on, and sometimes they push you to move on. And so then I left, and, this was a really dumb move that I made on when I left, which was like, I've been in retail this long. I'm not going to have a problem, get a job. Nobody could afford me at that point. And I understood it. I was like sitting going, oh, you want to make how much? And, so I make the joke, like, even Starbucks didn't hire me to be a barista, because it was like, and I understood why, because they're like, this guy's going to, when the economy gets better, he's going to jump ship the minute he finds something. So it ended up working out, because my partner has always been the one to push me. And, I've always had the support of my family, but my partner's been the one who has seen what I can do and what I'm capable of, and pushes me when I'm scared, pushes me like, you can do it. And that's what ended up me working for a national nonprofit called Lambda Legal, because he would always kind of joke, like, you do all this activism and all this fighting for our rights and all this stuff. He goes, and you're like a volunteer and you're doing it for free. He goes, why don't you get paid to do it? And this job opened up with a national nonprofit called Lambda Legal. I'm not a lawyer, but I got to work with a bunch of lawyers doing civil rights work, at the Supreme Court level, all the way down to, district court levels. And it's the nation's largest and oldest legal nonprofit that fights on behalf to make the case for equality for lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgender people, as well as those living with HIV. And I was just like, I know issues. I get into this world, and wow, my eyes, I didn't know issues. I thought I knew LGBTQ plus issues and folks that are transgender and, folks living with HIV. I thought I knew the issues. I learned so much, but then that advocacy that was just the fire in my heart, made me just like really push for things and really push for a lot of things that changed here locally and across the nation. So, and then one of my fraternity brothers, my pledge fraternity brother, he actually is a lawyer, and he ended up working with us, a few years later.
That's great.
And so he is also Latino, and his name is Paul Castillo, and he is from El Paso. And what I think is so cool is, having been in the fraternity with him, if you've been to college, and, the way I got to go, which was, you have the college experience, and,
Sure.
You have those late nights where you might have had a little too much tequila, or, you just stayed up really late because you're studying, and I remember one night telling him, we're going to change the world. Watch, you're young and you're like, you have this like desire. And he was on the marriage equality case that changed marriage equality for the entire nation. And so he's the only Latino
At the Supreme Court.
At the U.S. Supreme Court. And he's the only one whose name is on there. And I'm like, I know that dude. It's like, I know him.
He changed the world.
And I go, see, I told you we would change the world. In our one special little way, we did it. And so that's one thing.
That's not little.
Right. No, it's not little, but meaning in our little way, our portion, because it wasn't like it was just us. It was, there was tens of thousands of people working on this issue. And then, the next thing that happened to me was people just knew who I was. I ended up on the county school board, which no longer exists. And then we moved from Lake Highlands, and we happened to move back to West Dallas, and people immediately started asking me to run for office. And I, it's like, I'd never dreamed to run for office. I didn't, it wasn't something in my, some people plan out their lives, right? And I just go with the flow.
Before we go into politics,
Yeah.
I want to talk about that too, and how you ended up in that direction. As you self-identify as LGBTQ plus.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change the way you identify being a Latino? And is your experience such that because you were in a world where that was accepted, does that change the way people in that world perceive you as a person of color,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for non-LGBT, we've got the race issue sometimes
Sure.
we deal with, and some people who are Latino, that's their identity.
Right.
You wear two identities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mitigate any of the adversity you may have faced just by simply being a Latino
Mm-hmm.
man?
I think, yes. I've seen, and had the places where it's like I have to, watch how I say things, or, make sure that the LGBTQ cultural words or phrases, don't come out, too often. I would say you're a politician.
I was.
You were,
I'm recovering.
You're recovering. Maybe one day I'll get there. It's like, but like I tell people all the time is like, when you're out there being a politico, it's like you're on stage, and people expect you to be a certain image that's in their brain. But what was really wild when I ran for city council is, I don't know if it's just because I was so active and people they didn't really see, like, oh, here comes the gay guy, and they also weren't like, oh, here comes the Latino. But I can tell you that I do have and have had, and probably will continue to have the experiences where, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen the movie Selena, where they're talking about being Mexican American, and, the dad all of a sudden is like, you got to be more American than the Americans and more Mexican than the Mexicans. And it's exhausting, and that happens to me every once in a while, where I'll have non-LGBTQ plus Latinos tell me that, oh, he's gay first, and then he's Latino. And then I get it from the LGBTQ plus community. Oh, he's Latino first, and he's not LGBTQ plus first. And I'm like, this is exhausting. It's like, I don't have a switch. It's like, I happen to be Latino and LGBTQ plus. And so I'm going to fight for raza, and I'm going to fight for LGBTQ plus people. And what I tell people all the time is, being part of the LGBTQ plus community, we're part of every community. It doesn't matter if you're, brown, black, white, Asian, Native, Muslim, Christian, Jew, and anything in between. It's like, we're part of that fabric. And for me, there's no turning one off or the other. Are there times when, I'm pushing for, strictly LGBTQ plus issues? Yeah. And sometimes I'm pushing for strictly, Latino issues, or sometimes it's a combination.
Has the Latino community, embraced that, or because it's so traditional in many respects, sure, and somewhat religious? Even today, we see more self-identified evangelical Latinos, and of course, our heritage is generally Catholic.
Sure.
Because of that religious heritage that we share, has that been something where you feel like the Latino community is less accepting of LGBTQ individuals?
Absolutely not. That was the biggest surprising thing. That was one of my fear factors of running for city council. The school board's one thing, but council was another thing, because the school board, it was a casual vacancy, and I just had to convince 6 members of a board to appoint me. And then I ran for re-election and didn't have an opponent. So anybody who's ever running for office, run without an opponent. It's the best way to do it.
I did that once. It was glorious.
Right. It's the best thing. And so then I ended up on council, and I was nervous because I was running in a district that didn't have a traditional LGBTQ plus neighborhood in it. Do I have people that, of course, there's community members that live all throughout it, and my district is 77% Latino. And that was one of my fears. But you want to know what was really interesting was, not once at doors or in forums or, folks coming to me or asking me questions, did anybody ever once bring my sexual orientation. Do you want to know who did bring up my sexual orientation?
I do.
The Dallas Morning News during that campaign in 2017 kept gay baiting and gay baiting and gay baiting, because everything they'd write about me, somehow they'd list, and his partner and his partner and his partner. And, that was where I felt some discrimination. It was like, luckily nobody was paying attention to that, or it didn't trigger anybody. And so I got in office, and, afterwards I've had, when I won, I had several people, Latinos, and across the board, they're like, you really taught me a lot about gay people. I'm like, wow, how? Because I wasn't teaching anything. We weren't talking about it. They go, that you were just a normal guy, a regular guy that cared about our community, and you just happened to be gay. And so that was really, so that made me feel really good about our Latino community, that, so many, and this is where it comes from, is that there's an organization called Familia es Familia. I don't know if they're still around, but this was during the marriage equality debate. And they did a lot of research and studies. And what they really realized was, in our Latino communities, family is so important. Having La Familia, that's the center of everything and the center of your world. And so many, whether it was moms, dads, tios, tias, abuelitas, were very much so that I don't want to lose that person in my family. there's something different about them, but I don't want to lose them. And so we have a lot more acceptance within the community. I'm not going to say it's everybody, because there's going to be people who don't, obviously, but that's any community. And we're seeing more and more that even Catholic Latinos and evangelical Latinos, actually Catholic Latinos, support LGBT rights and gay marriage and all those things at this exponentially high amount. It's like close to 80% think it's okay that you can be a good Catholic and still, be okay with these issues. And then when it comes to evangelicals, it drops a little bit, but not as much as, and this was 8-9 years ago when this data was coming out. So I'm sure it's different today now that it's been around for a while. And it's like, nobody's quote unquote straight marriage ended, it's like.
It is changing even in the last decade.
Yeah.
Before the marriage equality Supreme Court ruling, that was still something that was highly contested, even in the Texas legislature.
Sure.
And I remember when I was running, and I ran, as you know, as a Republican when I won my first election, that was a very dicey issue. And this is just a decade ago.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas I think today, the Republican candidates that run, they just don't have to face that like we did even a decade ago. But I can only imagine, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I was telling my children today, there were still laws on the books as recently as 1980s in Texas that said, certain behaviors were not allowed. Two people that love each other can't love each other in certain ways, whatever. Yeah. It just boggles the mind. And even again, going back to our childhood, I remember seeing an open discrimination and it was okay. And so things have changed. And so it's people like you, I think, that really drive that, because you're, as your constituent said, just a good guy.
Yeah.
a good guy doing good things for the people. And you don't wear your sexuality on your sleeve. It's just a part of who you are, just as I don't with my wife or whatever. And I think we normalize that, and I think that's healthy. And that's become, hopefully there are more people like you that are out and open, and it's just something.
Right. It's just, and that's the thing is, Harvey Milk was, is given credit for being the first ever openly gay person elected in the United States. There's actually a Latino who was before that, but didn't get the same credit. We're used to that. But, what's really wild is that, he really talked about, coming out and being out, because then like you said, if you want to call it normalize it, but it's like, it's not so scary. And I think that's what's happening right now with our transgender communities. They're finally able to start coming out a little more and more. We're not where we need it to be with folks that are transgender.
Let me correct my language. Normalize is the wrong word. Yeah. That suggests that somehow it's not normal.
Right.
And then it's becoming normal because of the behaviors. I said that incorrectly. What I should have said is it becomes much more a part of who we are.
Right. Yeah. I knew what you meant. It's like, so we're seeing that, right? And I was shocked, because I didn't realize I've had so many firsts at the city council, just things that I say. And it's not because I'm trying to, get political points or, be the most liberal on the council or anything like that. It's just kind of how I breathe. It's who I am. And for me, getting into this entire world was all about discrimination. Hearing the stories from my abuela, I used to call her abuela, and where, when I was in college, I took a Mexican Americans literature class. And so we read a lot of different books. There was one called George Washington Gomez. And it's a really fascinating book. And it's basically is about a young man, Latino, how he got his name, George Washington Gomez, right? And then he ends up being part of the Texas State Troopers. And we know that there was a history of, racism within the troopers, and he becomes one. And so it was this fascinating book. And so I was talking to my grandmother, my abuela, about it. And, just the things of the discrimination we started reading about, because I wasn't taught any of this in school. We were taught about the Blacks being discriminated against, but never that the Hispanics were, the Mexicans were. And she told me about growing up, because she grew up here in Dallas, and they were migrant workers, and say they'd go all the way up to Michigan and then come all the way back down to the Rio Grande Valley and then patras, up and down, right? But Dallas was home. And she told me that there's two stories she told me, which was that I don't know what it was like growing up, because she remembers when she would go to restaurants or stores and there would literally be signs that said, no dogs or Mexicans allowed. And she has or had, a picture of one of those. And I was just so mortified. Like, I just didn't understand it, because growing up, I was always taught, you help those that, have less than, being brought up. I was raised a Catholic, but I didn't become a Catholic until I was 8 years old. So before that, mom was trying out different denominations, but we were always taught that you help those that aren't as privileged as you are. And so that's just been something that's been in me ever since. And I remember her telling that, and I was just devastated by it. And then she told me a story of when one time they were in the fields picking, whatever they were picking. And she said there was a little boy, and she can't remember how old he was because, my grandmother was a senior citizen by this time, but she said she remembers a little boy who was thirsty, and he went to and it's not like they had water fountains for the migrant workers or anything. It was pretty much like a ditch, just a little puddle, and they poured, fresh water in there. And that's what you drank out of. Well, he went too early, and the man, I don't know what you call him, but the guy overseeing the workers literally shot the kid to death, like just pulled his rifle out, pow, and shot him, and he was dead because he came to get water at the wrong time. And, hearing that story was just devastating because I could see the fear still in her eyes and, hearing the shaking of her voice, because that was when she was a little girl. This is like probably 60, 70 years later, and she's still, there's a lot of trauma in there. And I was like, wow, that's how we were treated. And people sometimes don't realize that, like Latinos, we went through the same things, very similar things that the Blacks went through. But for whatever reason, we don't share our stories or tell our stories the way we need to. And it's not saying that, it's not a contest of, we suffered more than you. Absolutely not. It's like we had these problems, that you all had these problems, and let's never have these things happen again. And so ever since I was a kid, this has just been ingrained in my heart. And I remember the first time that, if you want to, call it the first time I had a friend who I went to a very diverse school, so we were probably a 25% Latino, 25% Black, 25% Asian, and 25% white. This was in Houston. And I remember I was in the first grade, and my friend Anthony Little, who I've known ever since the first grade, he was moving from New York City to Texas and to Houston at that. I was just fascinated just hearing that some new kid was coming from New York. Like, I didn't know what New York really was except for in books and movies, as a first grader. And the teacher had told us that it was very important that, we make sure we try to be friends with this person, because can we imagine how scary it must be to leave your home and come here? And he was moving with his grandparents. We didn't know the whole story. And I just was so fascinated. I took that to heart and was like, when he got there, it's like I went and made sure that, I said hello, had lunch with him, and we became instant friends. It's probably the first person to talk to him in the school, and then other people. And he became a very, very popular kid. And, now he's still a very popular adult. But it was just fascinating. Ever since then, it's like I try to really be that person who goes up to people and it's like, hey, how's it going? You're eating alone. You want to join me?
It's the hallmark of a politician, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I teach my kids, be friends with those who have none, and you'll always have friends. And that really, they take that message, and it's those people. I go, you see somebody sitting by themselves at a lunch table, go over there. Yeah. It can harm no one to do that. It can only help and make someone's day.
And, and I've had people tell me later, I smile all the time. It's just, I always have. And, people know something's wrong with me when I don't smile or when I'm not smiling, that something's wrong with me. It's either I'm stressed or, something bad's happened, but it's pretty rare. And I've had a lot of people tell me, they go, that they'll remind me later. They're like, oh yeah, you met me. Da, 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 da. As a politician, you meet thousands of people. Sure. Can't remember everybody. And that's a little hard. It's the hard part about this job. But at the same time, it's like when you hear from somebody and they're like, you just had this smile that, you made me feel so welcome. And I haven't seen you in 2 years, but, they go, I just remember how you welcomed me. And I was like, well, yeah, because everybody's welcome. I mean, that's how I feel. And it's like, politics is politics. So even when, you're going to create enemies, that's politics, but even then it's like, I still try to work with those who don't want to, that have decided I'm the, devil incarnate, it's like, and that's okay, but I'm still trying to help them or still work with them because I'm like, you're still a human being. And I just take this job so seriously. I still represent you. And, and some folks are a little harder to represent than others, I'm not going to lie, but, but it's like, but I still represent them. And, I tell people a lot of times that maybe I'm in this with the Pollyanna rose-colored glasses thing, but I'm like, I really firmly believe that the people are my boss and it's my job to work for them, not me tell them what we're doing for them. It's like, what do you need? And so a lot of my constituents at the beginning would laugh because I'd walk into rooms, crime watch meetings, town halls, whatever it was, when we could congregate, and they would laugh because I'd be like, okay, bosses, what's up? What are my marching orders today? And it's like, because I really, they're my bosses. I mean, they're taxpayers.
They hired you, they could fire you.
That's right. That's right.
I always took that to heart, that these people could fire me.
Yep.
Every 2 years. They had an opportunity to send me home. It was a job interview during the campaign. Yep. That's how I felt about it. Well, I think you've answered my question about what led you to politics. What I've gleaned from our conversation is, one, you had a heart for civil justice that was instilled in you by your grandmother. And then two, you love people and you're an optimist and you want to engage. And I think those two criteria are probably part of the DNA of every person that runs for office. So those things were in you already. What was the catalyst? You said, I'm going to run for city council.
I'll be honest with you. I just started attending neighborhood. I moved to a new neighborhood, right? I lived in Lake Highlands for a dozen years. Then, now I'm in West Dallas. I had never lived in West Dallas before, but I'm here now. And I do, like I always do, is I jumped into going to community. I'm a nerd and I like going to crime watch meetings and I like going to neighborhood association. I just like it. And I was representing the entire county at the time on the county school board. And so it was natural for me. And it's like, I just like being involved. And then as I started meeting people, I knew some of them, but as I started meeting more and more, they were like, we need a new representative at City Hall. We need a champion. We want somebody who will give us a voice. We've been ignored. And I kept hearing the same thing over and over and over. And they're like, we know that you get stuff done. We know that you work hard. Like, we've heard about you. You live here now. We want you to run. You're the guy.
So that was a tough race, as I recall, because you were going up against somebody who had a well-known name,
right?
Somebody who'd been in office, and her brother was in office. I served with him,
and brother-in-law had held the seat before.
Right. So it was a family
quarter century.
And look, that's not easy to unseat an incumbent, and who's another Latino. So how did you approach that? How was the campaign? Did it get ugly? And what was the secret sauce in that race?
Well, I'll tell you that I definitely ran home after, hearing this for 4, 5, 6 weeks, and had people telling me I needed to run. And of course, the first person I talked to was my partner. That's my family. And then, I talked to my actual, my blood family, after that, to say, thinking about doing this. Are y'all with me or not? And I told my partner he has 100% veto power. If he wasn't in it, and before I could even finish, he was like, you need to run, you need to do this. This is exactly what you need to do. Because like I said earlier, he's the guy who's always pushed me to be the better me. And, and I stopped, I was like, whoa, think about it a little longer. Remember, our lives are going to become public. We're not going to be able to move without people scrutinizing it. I mean, everything you do, you've done this before. So, anything you say, do, you look funny and they're going to get you for it. And, and I told him, I go, this is what could happen. And I said, so let's do a pros and cons list, to really think about it. And, the next morning he wakes up, I thought about it. You're in, do it. I was like, I still wasn't ready, personally. And so, in my brain, it was like, I'm not a rich guy, I'm a gay guy, it's like, why me? Everything was like, why I couldn't. And then it was he and a couple other people who came up to me and finally were like, why not you? You're thinking of every reason why you shouldn't, instead of every reason why you should. And then they just started listing, they were the best campaign people, it was like, because they convinced the candidate to want to do it. And then of course I called my consultant and was like, let's crunch numbers. Let's see what's going on. And we looked at the numbers and, several times we were at our dining room table and I looked at them and I said a different word, but I was like, quit screwing with me, but I used a different word. And it was like, are these the numbers? Are these the numbers? And she looked at me and she's like, Omar, why would I screw with you like this? These are the numbers. And I looked down and, it's like, that's that moment, it's like, you're looking at the real numbers, the raw data. And I looked up and, I've got 4 or 5 people staring at me, waiting to see what I'm going to say. And I said, you're looking at the next council member from District 6. Let's do this. And the rest was history. It's like
that moment in the first race. I remember my moment as well. My wife is next to me and we're seeing those numbers. And like you, we were blown away. Yeah. It's like, we just won this race.
Yeah.
And the feelings that come over you are, one, relief, because the campaign is brutal. and then 2, excitement, and then 3, just like, what's next?
Right. I tell people all the time, campaigning's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun for me, but it's like governing is the real work. And, that's when people start to really see whether you can get things done or not. And, we had 17 was a fun campaign for me. And I'm going to say, it wasn't really about me. It was so much more about they want to change. And, so here was this guy who actually was competent, had a record, success, and, could actually say what he was going to do. And now I'm in my, running for my 3rd term, and, because we run every 2 years as well, just like the state representatives do. And this is, like you said, this is my review. It's like, I've got to go back to the people and go, this is what I've done. This is what I've done on your behalf. And, like we've said, it's like, what have you done for me lately moment.
Well,
and,
I'm not your constituent directly,
right.
but just indirectly across a couple of highways.
Yeah, just not too far away.
And the reports I get are you're an A+ student and everyone's going to be supportive. I know, I found your work to be inspirational and your dedication to the craft and to what you're doing just to be head and shoulders above what I've seen from other council people. So thank you for that. 3rd term, as I recall, you're termed out after, is it 4 terms?
4 terms, right.
So 4 terms, boy, what's next?
I tell people all the time, I look really far in the future when I'm doing governance and things like that. But on the personal level, I don't. And, I've had people tell me, what am I running for next? Or what am I setting myself up for? And I was like, I know this is going to sound so cliche, but it's like, I'm really just setting myself up to be the best darn city council member that I possibly can be for the residents of District 6. And, we'll see what the future holds when the future gets here.
Coming from you, I believe that. Mm-hmm. People like you who do show such citizen servantry, you really are dedicated to the moment and to the job. And sure, if you do great and everybody loves you and there's an opportunity down the road, of course you'll consider it.
Sure.
But guys like you and others that are true public servants, they're not always planning for, the 5-year plan. That's something you do with your college budget, not necessarily your political career.
Right. And you might do that with your actual, career, right? If politics isn't your career, it's like I tell people all the time, I didn't grow up to get into politics. I'm not going to lie and say I've been block walking since I was 5 years old. So, but it was never in my dream, to do that. I'll tell you the one big dream I ever had was that I wanted to go to a Democratic National Convention. I got to do that in 2012, and it's like, and I loved it. I had the time of my life. It was so much fun. And it's like, and I never have to do it again. It's like, because I want other people to have that experience. But that was, if you want to say, the one political dream I ever had was to get to experience that. Because it was like, as a little kid, I just thought it was so much fun.
I wanted to speak at one.
That would be really cool.
I've been to several Republican national conventions, but I always look at that podium and think, man, I want to
you want to be on there
prime time speech.
That's not me, but I mean, if they called me and said I was up, I know I would do it and I'd knock it out of the park. But, it's like, I also growing up watched both the Republican and the Democratic ones. And, I was born and raised, I say I was born and raised a Democrat. And it wasn't because if my mom, I'll tell you the story really quickly. My mom, teacher, 1979. It was the Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan election, and there was no early voting back then. And so, they set up the polling place in the school cafeteria. Ours was a cafetorium, and we got to tour it. I'm in kindergarten, so, you can only know so much in your brain. And I remember going home and they taught us about the polls and all that. And I went home and my mom, any parent goes, what'd you learn today? Right. I wasn't the kid who was like, oh no, I didn't learn nothing. I was the kid who was like, and, so I told her we learned about voting and how important it was and this, that, and the other. And then she goes, oh, okay, that's great. And my mom's not exactly politically involved. I know she voted, but she wasn't politically involved. And she said, well, did you have any questions? And I was like, well, no, I asked about this and that. I go, but the one question teacher wouldn't answer was if we were Democrats or Republicans. And she just kind of looked at me and I was like, she said she couldn't tell us. And, I was like, well, it makes sense now, but as a kindergartner, it made no sense to me. I was like, you're my teacher. You're supposed to teach me things. So tell me what I am, right? And so my mom said we were Democrats. And I go, why? And she goes, in the best way she probably knew. She's like, they help poor people.
Yeah.
okay, I'm sold. Church told us to help poor people. So
it's a good thing.
And so I was 5. And literally that day, I go out into my neighborhood because I was allowed 2 houses to the right and 2 houses to the left. And I literally knocked on those doors and begged people to please vote for Jimmy Carter so that he could, continue to help poor people. Like neighbors called my mom, you know what your son's doing. Nobody's told me to do this. I just do it on my own.
You block walk for Jimmy Carter.
By myself.
By yourself. That's great.
No lid, no t-shirt, And then she let me watch the returns the next day, which was, that was a Monday. The next day was Tuesday. Of course, Jimmy Carter lost by like 7:01 p.m. It was over. And I lost it. Tears, the big ugly cry. I couldn't breathe, the snot nose,
You believed in him.
Well, I believed in him because they told me he was going to help poor people, so that's all I knew.
Who couldn't be for that?
Right. And so then she comes out, she consoles me. She says, what is going wrong? What is wrong with you? And I was like, I can't believe Americans don't want to help poor people. It's like, and I've been a Democrat ever since. And so that was 1979. I didn't win. I'm doing hash mark or quote marks because it's like if it was all me on my own. I didn't win a presidential race until Bill Clinton. So I was in college, when my entire elementary, middle school, and high school career was, and I was campaigning. I mean,
you lived in Texas, no less.
No less, right? And I even campaigned for Dukakis. Come on, it's like that's how hardcore I was. And then I took a break after Bill won for a little bit, and then I got back involved big time again when I was in Dallas in about 2006-07. And it was the Obama-Hillary primary.
That was something.
Yeah. And then before I knew it, now I'm an elected official. That was not the plan, but, I'm enjoying it. What I love about this job is I really feel like I really do believe in government, and I believe government can do good things if you have the right people, working together to make that governance really help people. And like what you said earlier was something about, how good it feels when you actually help somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's like, for me, that's, almost every day you get to have that little special nugget of, we helped La Señora Salazar get a new ramp through the Texas Ramp Project, or we were able to get somebody's water cut back on, or, just recently we had this crazy ice storm. We all lived through it. Even I had no power, no water, and was, in my car, trying to get warm. And that was probably the most helpless I ever felt. But at the same time, I was like, if you feel this way, imagine what your constituents are feeling. And I was like, okay, it's time to get your tail out there, Omar, and be who you are, get information out, what do they need? Start thinking, what do they need?
You were working at the right after. I was looking at your Facebook, and of course, the next afternoon, you're out there, getting water out there and everybody else.
We were ahead of the curve, but it was, I hate to say it, emergency management. Since I've been on council, this wasn't my first rodeo. I started with the gas explosion about 3.5 years ago. And then we had the spring storm. I've had a tornado. We all share the pandemic, right? Social unrest. And now we had this snowpocalypse. So I'm like, I laughed in my head. I was like, I don't know if y'all remember that commercial. I can't remember which presidential election it was, but it was like, who do you want answering the phone at 3 a.m.? It was some really dark, shadowy campaign, but I was like, that started going through my brain. I was like, I'm the guy you want to call at 3 a.m.
You're the most well-trained city councilman in the history of Dallas, Texas. So let's close with one quick question that's burning on my mind. Since you work the streets, knocking doors in West Dallas, the best tacos in Dallas. Where am I going to find those?
Oh, man. The taco wars are started, they're won, and they're lost on Singleton Boulevard. Just about any place up and down Singleton. Yeah, Singleton Boulevard. My favorite place, unfortunately, didn't make it through the pandemic. Was called Tacos Mariachi. But he's coming back later this year with a vengeance, with a new concept, and I cannot wait. So,
well, when you decide to go out there, let me know, and I'll buy the first round.
Sounds good. I'm going to hold you that.
All right. Omar, thank you so much for your time today. I'm blessed to have had this opportunity to talk with you, and thankful for your service. So this is a good conversation. We'll have some more. Be with us next week on the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation's Our Story. Thanks very much.
The Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation would like to thank you for joining us today on Our Story. You can find more information about the foundation at www.txhpf.org, on Facebook on the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation page, or on Twitter @TexHPF. Please join us next week on Our Story, a podcast dedicated to the voices of Texas Hispanics.